do a lecture this evening, so perhaps we will stop around, if we will see, but around 6 o'clock, so that you can have a walk if you want, and I can rest. So we can make a little stop after 5 o'clock, and then. Is that clear? No? There's a really subtle formulation of the content or the object of the vow.
It seems to me that a modern mind, a contemporary mind, might complain that it's too self-referential. Too self-referential. Empty, but you see it as a quality. But you see it as a quality.
But it's a subtle way to make a distinction between a law. It must have a content and command and prohibit certain actions, and the vow, which you could say on one hand, it refers to the whole of life, and the other, precisely for that reason, is empty. It's a vow of the vow in its formulation. It's interesting how we have to conceive our way to imagine a rule for our life. So then, and it is in the Franciscans, that is to say many centuries after the birth of monasticism, that, as we saw in the beginning, this problem becomes in some way quite clear. The Franciscans seem really to be aware of the fact that rule and life enter and must enter in a zone of difference. You remember I quoted the Franciscan first rule, where the rule is called life. The fact that is interesting that it's called life even when it's considered as something written, because there is a passage in this rule where Francisco say, referring to what it has written in the rule, que in ista vita scripta sunt, what I have written in this life. So he really calls life the rule. Now it's a text. That's strange, really strange. He calls the rule a life, even when he considers it as a text. And I quoted the commentaries, you remember, by Olivi, etc. There is another interesting commentary by another Franciscans, Hugo de Digne, Hugo of Digne, a French Franciscan, where again he goes back to the distinction we already saw between to promise the rule and to promise to live according to the rule. Remember, we saw already this distinction, and he goes back to this distinction, and he says that when someone promises to observe the life and the rule of the Holy Francis, he promises according to the form of the rule, secundum formam regulae, according to the form of the rule, and therefore does not oblige himself to observe this single norm and this single prescription. So you see, even in the vocabulary there is a clear distinction according to the form of the rule. It's the first instance of what in Kant will become the form of the law. The form of law, not the content. And then so he doesn't oblige to do this or that, but he will oblige himself to omnia indistincte, everything without distinction. So again, if you oblige yourself to everything, you can also say that you oblige yourself to nothing. And he goes on, so that the very form of life, forma vivendi, form of living of the monk falls sub voti efficacia, under the efficacy of the vow. So what falls under the vow is the form of life, and not this action, I must do this and that. So you see now how I think there is here a clear awareness of the opposition between the role and the law, but on the other hand, we could see this as the first stage of the modern process, which will then make that the law could take the turn of an undetermined form, like we saw in Carl Schmitt, etc., and security. So you can see this both process. So in the Franciscan literature, this is something that comes again and again. So, Olivi, Clarenos, all the great Franciscan commentators will state this. So they have a clear consciousness that the rule of the Franciscan rule is something different. And there is also in the Franciscan the idea of not only a difference with respect to the sphere of law in general, but also with respect to the others' rules. Because what had happened in the history of the monasticism, when, as I told you, the church took control, of the monasteries, the church wanted that the Benedictine rule become the model, the paradigm of all others. So after that, whenever a new monastic order was created, the rule was determined by the model of Benedictine rule. And we know in the biography of Francis that at a certain moment, bishops and other representatives of the church came to him to impose him, to ask him that. And also you must take the Benedictine rule. And we know that he refused. He refused formally. We know that he had his strategy in this case was to play the fool. So what one of the reasons I dwell and investigate these monastic rules is precisely this field of tensions, or this zone of indistinction between rule and life. This I found very interesting. Nevertheless, as I told you, my impression is that if we ask now, did the monks succeed in creating a form of life, such a thing, something as a form of life? I'm not sure. I would say they failed. They failed in some way. For many reasons. One was this struggle with the church and the power of the church. As far as the Franciscans are concerned, as I told you, the struggle was real. It was a real struggle, but also another point of fighting, another question of the debate, was precisely the juridical sphere. You know that according to the New Testament, in some way the law has been abolished, accomplished or abolished.